Chuck Norris? He's old. In this sport, men like him don't survive anymore." The words landed like a slap across the entire arena. They came from the reigning MMA champion, standing on stage at a press conference that was supposed to sell tickets, not insults. His voice cut through the lights, the cameras, the crowd. Sharp, mocking, designed to humiliate. The room erupted. It wasn't a cheer, not exactly. It was a rolling wave of sound. Laughter in some corners, jeers and whistles in others. Like a stadium that couldn't decide whether to cheer blood or call for respect. The sentence was already racing through social media, climbing out of the building before the echo died inside it. Banks of cameras swiveled, flashes firing like lightning. The host at the podium blinked, caught off guard. He tried to smile, mumbled something about keeping it light, but the damage was done. The insult had changed the energy. This wasn't marketing anymore. It was a public challenge, raw and dangerous. The champion leaned back in his chair, smirking, and raised a glove to his coach. He slammed a few punches into the pads, fast, loud, the sound cracking like firecrackers in the microphone. The crowd cheered that too, part applause for his skill, part applause for his defiance. He drank in their reaction like it proved him right. Commentators at the edge of the stage looked at each other, half nervous, half thrilled. One whispered into his headset, "This is going to blow up. Bigger than the fight itself." And then the cameras found him. Chuck Norris, sitting in the front row. No spotlight had been placed on him. He wasn't dressed for show. Plain shirt, jacket, nothing fancy. He hadn't flinched when the insult landed, hadn't smiled, hadn't frowned. He simply sat, hands folded on his lap, his eyes fixed on the stage. That stillness did more than any outburst could. The crowd's noise faltered. People glanced at one another, at the screens above, at the man sitting calm among the storm. The champion saw it too, and for the first time his smirk wavered. Only for a second, but it was there. The host cleared his throat, shuffled cards, tried to pivot back into routine questions, but it was too late. The insult hung in the air like smoke. Everyone could feel the tension pressing down on the arena. It had stopped being about marketing a fight. It had turned into something much older, much simpler, respect and its absence. Phones pointed down at Chuck. Some fans clapped nervously, trying to break the silence. Others booed, not at him, but at the awkwardness of the moment. The building itself seemed split in half. Half with the champion, half waiting for the legend to respond. But Chuck didn't move. Not a word, not a gesture. His silence became the story. The champion sensed it, tried to grab the moment back. "You see?" he shouted, leaning toward the microphones. "He won't even answer. Legends? They're good for movies, not for fights. This is my time." The crowd roared again, but it wasn't as clean as before. Something was shifting, and in the middle of that storm, one man sat calm, steady, unshaken. The questions started rising in every mind, whispered or shouted, inside the arena and out in living rooms where the clip was already playing. Would he answer? Just wondering? "Where are you watching from?" "Write it down, Bello." He felt the room tilt toward him and leaned harder. The champion popped up from his chair before the host could lob the next softball and beckoned to his coach. Pads came up. The first salvo cracked like dry wood. Pop, 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 a thudding body shot for punctuation. He wasn't just hitting, he was translating the earlier insult into a rhythm the crowd could chant. Cameras crowded the apron edge to catch the blur. The speakers spit back each strike with a rubbery slap that lived half in the chest, half in the head. "See?" he shouted between combinations. Breath crisp, grin wide. "This isn't the 80s. This is today." He threw a flurry so fast the coach had to chase the last punch with his pad to save his shoulder. The lower bowl rose with him, a warm wall of approval. Upstairs, the boos thinned into restless murmurs. The building smelled like sweat and sanitizer and hot metal from the lights. The heat of bodies gathered to witness something teetered on the edge of spectacle and judgment. He wasn't done. He peeled off his jacket and tossed it to a publicist, kept talking while he moved. Always talking, keeping the rope of attention tight in his fist. You know those old movie hits? Wide, dramatic, all for the camera? He tipped his chin toward the front row without looking. That's not fighting. This is he snapped a kick into a thigh pad and let the pad ring on purpose. The coach winced and hit it with a nod. Phones caught the wince. The big screen didn't. Cheers rolled back over the glare. The champion bowed theatrically, gave the crowd a little shuffle step, then pointed the glove toward the front row again, a lazy, casual dare. Journalists smelled blood. One of them leaned forward, voice bright with the kind of courage microphones give. "Chuck, are you going to answer that?" Others piled on, the way birds do when the first one finds bread. "Do you accept the challenge? Is the legend still alive?" The questions crawled over each other and became one sound. The cameras pivoted in a wave. Lenses found the plain jacket, the folded hands, the steady eyes. He rose, and a different kind of sound washed the room. Not a cheer. Not a boo. The hush that happens when people realize the next sentence might stay with them after the night ends. He didn't smooth his clothes or glance at a screen to see how he looked. He stood, and the front row shifted back a fraction on instinct. The champion's eyes jumped to him and then to the nearest camera, seeking confirmation of his own narrative and finding only lenses. Security saw the movement and stepped forward a half step. They didn't block him. He gave them nothing to push against. No rush, no swagger. Just a straight walk toward the stage the press had turned into a ring without ropes. The host tried to get control back. "Gentlemen, let's keep this on format," he stammered, papers shaking just enough to make the lights quiver in their reflection. No one listened. The crowd had already chosen the channel. The champion's grin tightened. He fed the silence a line with too much edge on it. "You really want this? You want a minute with a real fighter?" He expected laughter to carry him. It didn't. The building held still. Even the LED wall seemed to dim a shade in the pause. Somewhere in the upper deck, a fan's soda cup rolled under a seat and tapped the concrete twice before stopping. The little sounds got large. Chuck reached the mat edge and put a hand on the canvas as if testing temperature. He didn't climb in. He didn't need to. The arena had already followed him to the lip of the apron. Up close, the camera found the details. Age gives a face. The snow at the beard. The map of years at the eyes. It also found something the champion's highlight reels didn't. An absence of hurry so complete it felt like leverage. "Words are cheap," the champion pushed. Louder now, his voice bouncing off truss and rig and returning to him with less confidence than he sent it with. "You and me, 60 seconds. Let's see if those stories can breathe." Chuck asked the timekeeper for a microphone with a small nod. He received it from a shaking hand that belonged to a professional who had held 1,000 mics and never one that felt this heavy. He didn't lift it high. He let the arena bend its ear. "Strength isn't about years," he said, voice dry as sun-bleached wood. "It's about control." He looked not at the champion, but through him, as if aligning an idea with a body. "You want to test it?" The line didn't crackle. It settled. The coach lowered the pads an inch without meaning to. The ref, who had wandered close enough to be seen, stopped pretending he wasn't there. The host's cards went still in his hands. People in the first 10 rows forgot to blink, and then blinked all at once. The champion laughed on reflex, too sharp, almost grateful to have something to do with his mouth. "We'll keep it friendly," he said, skating hard on the last word. "We're professionals." He turned to the referee. "Start a clock." The ref looked to the promoter to the producer to the legal guy hunched over a tablet with a face like wet paper. You could see the math being done mid-air. Insurance, spectacle, risk, the price of saying no to a crowd that had already stood. The legal guy opened his mouth and shut it. The promoter made a small, doomed little shrug. The ref sighed, as men do when they know they're stepping into a photograph that will be used against them later. He raised his hand. "Controlled movement only," he said, loud enough for the mics. "No headshots. If I say stop, you stop." The champion bowed to the rules with exaggerated courtesy, then shot the crowd a look that said rules were for other people. He bounced once, shaking out the jitters that creep in when history sits down across from you and asks for a minute of your time. Chuck didn't bounce. He placed the mic back on the table, rolled his wrist like a man who had been opening jars his whole life, and stepped onto the canvas. The texture under his boot changed the way sound behaves. The big screens cut tight on his feet, so the upper tiers could feel it too. The crowd surged forward in its seats as if the whole building had suddenly found the same hinge. Phones rose and steadied. The hum of electricity under the floor grew louder, or maybe everyone had just gotten quiet enough to hear it. He crossed to center. He didn't take the center. He arrived there, and the center remade itself to include him. The champion came out to meet him, still smiling, but the smile had to work for its money now. He lifted his gloves like punctuation marks and tilted his head just enough to sell fearlessness. Between them, the referee raised his palm. He cut a look to the timekeeper, who had been waiting his entire career to ring a bell that would echo like this. The man's hand hovered above brass, trembling. "On my count," the ref said. He didn't get to count. The arena leaned so hard into the moment that it made its own kind of silence. A pressure front rolling from cheap seats to floor. The champion's grin faltered at the edges, the way smiles do when they realize they've walked into a room where they aren't the funniest thing. The timekeeper, moved by a signal that no one had given but everyone had felt, struck the bell once. The note rang clean as a blade. The champion took a breath to talk over it. No words came. Chuck lifted his hands. Not high, just enough. And the next sound the building heard was the crowd forgetting to breathe. The bell rang once, sharp and clean, and the arena changed. The ring became an island under the glare of lights. The rest of the world swallowed in darkness, tens of thousands of people holding their breath without realizing it. The smell was a mix of sweat, popcorn grease, and the heat of too many bodies packed too close together. Every sound, the squeak of canvas, the crackle of the speakers, landed heavier than it should have. The champion moved first, bouncing lightly, chin down, gloves high. He grinned as though the outcome was already decided. 60 seconds, he mouthed. Not for Chuck, but for the cameras. His coach slapped the apron like a drumbeat. The audience tried to rally behind him, a chant rising in patches, but it didn't take. The sound scattered before it could become whole. Chuck lifted his hands with no hurry, no theatrics. His stance was narrow, calm, the kind of posture that seemed like nothing until you realized it gave nothing away. His eyes didn't watch the champion's face, but his core, where intention shows before action. The champion snapped a jab. Sharp, fast, textbook. It smacked against Chuck's glove and disappeared. Another jab, then a right cross, a hook for punctuation. The sequence looked like dominance on camera, but inside the ring it was like throwing into water. Nothing stuck. Nothing mattered. Chuck moved just enough. Half an inch here, a shoulder turn there. Each motion robbed the punch of weight before it landed. He didn't look like a man defending himself. He looked like someone subtracting beats from a song until there was no rhythm left. The crowd caught on. The noise shifted, no longer cheering but humming with nervous energy. They were watching something they couldn't quite describe but felt in their stomachs. The champion barked a laugh, too quick, too sharp. He feinted low, then whipped a kick toward Chuck's ribs. The shin cut through the air, but Chuck's arm was already waiting. Not a brutal block, just an interception. Perfectly timed. The kick lost its sting, forced to land early, and the sound of the sole-scraping canvas told the front rows that balance had slipped. A ripple moved through the building. Not cheers, not boos, just a collective "oh." The commentators stumbled over themselves, voices rising. "It's timing! He's dismantling the timing!" The champion forced another grin, pretending it was part of the plan. He stepped in heavier, throwing hooks to the body, trying to bully space. Chuck folded his elbow like a gate, absorbing each strike on bone. The punches landed, but they didn't count. Phones rose higher. Older fans, people who remembered grainy VHS tapes and smoke-filled gyms, leaned forward. They knew this wasn't defense. It was something older, quieter, more dangerous. 30 seconds. The champion switched southpaw, a trick to break rhythm. He fired a left toward the liver, gloves tight, chin hidden. Chuck turned a fraction, and the glove skated across his torso without effect. Chuck answered with a palm pressed lightly to the sternum. No power, no strike, just placement. It froze the champion's next step, forced him to reset. The microphones picked up the dull thunk. The crowd thought it was a hit and reacted like it mattered, but those watching closely saw the truth. It wasn't damage, it was control. Frustrated, the champion dropped a low kick at Chuck's front leg. A modern fighter's weapon. Chuck's weight had already shifted. The shin met empty air and canvas. The slap echoed, but the damage never came. The champion bounced back, hiding irritation with energy. 20 seconds! The champion tried a combination, desperate for clarity. Jab to pull the eyes, right to the ribs, knee to punish the pause. Chuck defused each piece with the smallest of movements. Glove there, elbow here, step gone. At the end, Chuck touched the champion's arm with an open palm, as if guiding him through a door. The champion stumbled one step sideways, forced to disguise it as ringcraft. The cameras didn't miss it. 15 seconds. The chants in the stands broke apart. Some shouted the champion's name, others Chuck's, but most just made noise without knowing what side they were on anymore. The champion went big, a head kick, fast and dangerous, the kind that ends fights. But Chuck wasn't there. He stepped inside the arc, close enough to let the kick sail past, and pressed his hand against the ribs in passing. Casual, like a notary stamping a document. The champion's landing foot clipped the rope. Balance faltered, and for the first time his face betrayed him. The smile cracked. 10 seconds. Commentary turned frantic. He's not blocking. He's editing the fight. He's erasing him. The champion, desperate, yelled, "Come on!" His voice cracked at the edges. He threw one last right hand, not to land, but to prove he could still dictate. Chuck shifted a postcard's width, and the glove brushed air. 3. Chuck hadn't attacked once. He hadn't needed to. He had let the clock work for him. 2. The crowd leaned forward as if gravity had tilted the building. 1. The bell rang again, bright and final. The champion staggered back 2 steps, his chest heaving, his face flushed. He threw up a smirk, but the cameras showed the truth. Doubt written across his eyes. Chuck glanced at the clock, rolled his wrists, and looked back at center. Calm, steady, unshaken. The minute was over, but the lesson had just begun. The champion's voice cracked as he shouted, "Fluke! You won't survive a real series!" His words rang off the steel rafters, but they didn't echo back the way he wanted. Still, he lunged forward, determined to bury doubt under noise and speed. The air filled with fists. Jab, cross, hook, low kick. He unloaded in sequence, each strike snapping like a whip. His gloves smacked against pads of air. His shins clapped against canvas when Chuck's feet weren't where they had been. Every miss sounded louder than the hits. The crowd gasped, then chuckled in places, a nervous, uncertain ripple spreading from section to section. Chuck barely moved. A glove lifted, an elbow folded, a shoulder rolled. He didn't flinch, didn't hurry. Each strike from the champion fell into nothing, stripped of power before it could matter. He looked less like a man defending himself than a man editing someone else's story, trimming away each line until only silence remained. The champion tried harder. He doubled his jab, threw 3 hooks in succession, pivoted, and kicked high at the ribs. Chuck's arm was there before the shin could sing, intercepting early. The kick collapsed short, the champion forced to drop his foot awkwardly, the squeak of rubber on canvas betraying imbalance. Laughter rose now, not cruel yet, but undeniable. The grin on the champion's face wavered. He threw a body shot, hard and mean, aiming to bully. Chuck lowered his elbow like a gate, the glove dying against bone with a dull thud. The champion's expression shifted. First confusion, then frustration. The commentators filled the air, half in disbelief, half in awe. "He's dismantling him. He's not blocking, he's erasing," one said. Another added, "Every strike looks good, but none of them land where they're supposed to." Norris is riding the rhythm. The champion changed levels, throwing a low kick, then a teep straight to the gut. Chuck angled slightly, and the kick skimmed by, grazing cloth instead of flesh. The champion stumbled forward, momentum betraying him. Chuck met him with nothing but a palm on his arm, redirecting him sideways like a man moving through a doorway. The crowd reacted instantly. A wave of laughter mixed with cheers. Phones zoomed closer. On the big screen, replays showed the palm touch again and again, each angle making it look more absurd. One man working furiously, the other not even trying to look impressive. The champion clenched his jaw and went high, firing a head kick, fast and brutal. For a split second, the arena leaned forward, believing this was it. But Chuck was already inside the arc, the shins slicing air where he'd been. On the way through, Chuck's hand pressed lightly against his ribs, casual, almost polite. The champion's landing foot clipped the rope. Balance betrayed him, and he staggered. This time, the laughter wasn't nervous. Whole sections of the arena laughed openly, while others booed to defend him. The noise warped into something dangerous. Not cheers, not jeers, but judgment. Sweat poured down the champion's face. His punches shortened, his shoulders heaved. He tried to cover the slip with bravado, yelling, "Throw something!" The words didn't sting. They pleaded. Chuck didn't answer. He didn't need to. His stillness was louder than words. The referee hovered, unsure if this was a contest or a lesson. The promoters stared at the floor, the legal team frozen. The audience shifted from entertainment to witness. People felt the shape of something irreversible unfolding in front of them. The champion's breathing turned ragged, chest rising and falling too fast. His gloves looked heavier with each swing. His kicks slapped the canvas louder than they struck flesh. Every effort became another public failure, another piece of proof that willpower alone wasn't enough. The champion wiped sweat from his brow with the edge of his glove and tried to laugh, but the sound cracked in his throat. His chest heaved too fast. His eyes searched for the cameras, for the crowd, for anything that could give him back control. He yelled, louder than before, "Come on, old man, hit me! Show them you've still got something!" The words scattered upward and died in the rafters. No chant came back, no echo, only pressure. Tens of thousands of people leaned forward but said nothing. Silence had more weight than all the noise that came before. Chuck didn't answer. He didn't have to. He shifted one foot forward, slow, deliberate, like a man walking across a floor he'd built himself. The ropes on the far side gave a soft groan, and the entire arena stiffened. The champion panicked at the quiet. He fired a jab, then another, sharp and clean. Both strikes died on Chuck's glove. He hurled a right hand with bad intentions, only to see it slide off Chuck's shoulder, lost as if it had never been thrown. "Hit me!" he barked again, but his voice betrayed him. It broke on the word hit. The cameras zoomed close on his face, and what they showed wasn't rage anymore. It was doubt. His grin had drained away, replaced by clenched teeth and sweat dripping down into his eyes. He blinked hard, desperate to bury the tremor in his body. He snapped a low kick toward the shin, hoping the noise alone would sting. Chuck's leg had already shifted. The kick landed on canvas with a flat slap, echoing failure into the cheap seats. Chuck kept walking. Calm, steady, patient. The space between them shrank until the champion's chest pressed tight with the awareness of just how close the storm was. He tried to make it look like he'd invited it, tilting his chin, bouncing his shoulders, but his lungs were giving him away. The commentators cut their chatter. One whispered into the hot mic, "Listen." And the world did. The arena was so quiet you could hear fabric shifting, a single cough swallowed, the hum of the power lines above the ring. The champion hurled a front kick straight for the gut. The shot was quick, powerful. Chuck's torso turned a degree, and the kick brushed past cloth. No impact. The champion stumbled forward on the landing. He covered it with a hook, but Chuck's forearm tilted, and the punch slid off bone. Nothing. The audience's energy flipped. They were no longer expecting a contest. They were waiting for a lesson. The champion's breath rasped now. He tried to hide it with a smile, but the microphones picked up the jagged inhale, amplifying his weakness to every seat in the house. He circled, hoping to reset the rhythm, but Chuck mirrored him perfectly, closing the angle like a shadow that refused to be shaken. The younger man whispered, not for the crowd, but for himself, "Throw!" Please, Chuck's shoulder dipped, almost imperceptible. The champion made his choice. Pride demanded forward. He lined a short right to the body. Textbook perfect. Hips turned, chin tucked, shoulder tight. If it landed, it would hurt. Chuck's center dropped the width of a coin. His hand left his pocket in a straight, efficient path. No wind-up, no signal. The heel of his palm touched a spot just above the belt line where the body hides its air. The sound was soft, a dull thunk, like a book laid on a desk. But its effect was instant. The champion's eyes went blank for a heartbeat, his mouth opening around a breath that wouldn't come. His knees softened, his hands sagged toward the ache before pride pulled them back up. His back foot slid involuntarily. He stayed on his feet, but everyone could see the truth. The crowd gasped together. Then came the roar, delayed, explosive, filling every corner of the arena. Commentators shouted over each other. It wasn't even loaded. That was control. He stole his air. Chuck didn't chase. He didn't raise his fists. He stepped a page's width to the side, making space for the man who had just been broken to keep standing. His face was calm, his hands open. He looked more like a teacher than a fighter. The referee leaned in, voice low but picked up by microphones. "Breathe." The word echoed through the arena. Advice meant for everyone. The champion tried. The first inhale came crooked, shallow. The second found shape but still rattled. He forced his gloves back up because habit is loyal, even when lungs aren't. His eyes darted. Corner stool, timekeeper, crowd. Anywhere but the man in front of him. Chuck inched forward again. Not aggressive, not rushed. Just close enough that the champion could see the years mapped around his eyes, the white in his beard, the steadiness that made the crowd forget about age entirely. Chuck's voice was low, but the arena carried it anyway. That's enough. Make the right choice. The champion glanced at the jumbo screen above, where the replay showed the palm strike in slow motion. It looked casual, almost nothing. But the ache in his ribs told him what it really was. He looked back at Chuck, saw no mockery in his face, only calm insistence. His hands lifted halfway, then sagged under their own weight. The arena stayed frozen. Tens of thousands of people leaned forward in silence, the entire building a single held breath. Even the phones stopped shaking. The champion shuffled one step forward, not with conviction, but to see if his legs still obeyed. They did, barely. He nodded once, conceding what his body already knew. His gloves dropped for half a second before pride yanked them back up. Chuck didn't move to finish. He didn't need to. The finish was already written in the younger man's labored breath and shaking shoulders. The bell hadn't rung. Time itself had. The crowd waited, balanced on the edge, ready to see whether this night would end with destruction or with a lesson. And then Chuck stepped. Just 1 inch forward, no flourish, no warning. The movement carried no threat, yet it bent the room. The arena fell into silence. Real silence. Tens of thousands of people, phones raised, all held still. The champion froze mid-motion, sweat dripping into his eyes. His lungs screamed for air, but he stared at the older man standing calm, unshaken, close enough to end it if he wanted. The crowd leaned in, their own bodies mirroring his tension. What had started as spectacle had become something else entirely. Not a fight for show, but a lesson playing out under the brightest lights. The champion reset his stance, desperate for control, but his hands trembled. He tried to summon rage, to bury doubt with one final charge. And Chuck waited, patient as stone. The storm had reached its edge. The next second would decide whether it broke. The champion kept his gloves at his face, but the gesture looked hollow now. His ribs burned, his breath came ragged. The crowd wasn't cheering anymore. They sat in a hush that carried more weight than noise. Thousands of people, waiting for something final. He tried to grin. It looked like a wince. He shouted hoarsely, "Again!" as if defiance could hold him up. His jab reached, his right hand followed, but both fell against Chuck's calm defense. A simple parry, a shift of weight, and the younger man's balance faltered again. The cameras showed everything. The tremor in his arms, the panic hidden under sweat. His power hadn't left, but his conviction had. Chuck stepped forward a fraction, close enough that the champion could see the years written in his face. Close enough that no one else in the arena mattered. His words were quiet, but the microphones carried them everywhere. "You wanted proof. Here it is." The champion sagged. His gloves lifted an inch, then dropped. Around them, the silence grew unbearable, a whole arena holding its breath. He looked at the screen above, saw the replay of the palm strike, simple and devastating. When his eyes returned to Chuck, there was no mockery waiting, only patience. That broke him more than a knockout would have. He dipped his head. Small, almost invisible. But the crowd caught it. The referee slid between them like daylight breaking a door. "That's it," he said, hand on the champion's chest. For a heartbeat, the building stayed still. Then applause swelled, cautious at first, then overwhelming. Not the roar of victory, but something steadier. Respect. The champion leaned into the ropes, gloves heavy at his sides. He searched the crowd and found no comfort, only truth. Chuck didn't gloat, didn't celebrate. He nodded once and lowered his hands as if closing a book. "You called me old," he said softly. "Age isn't weakness. It's knowing where not to waste strength." The words cut deeper than fists. The crowd rose, clapping, some even cheering through tears they'd never admit to. The champion lifted one glove and offered it forward. Chuck touched it, brief and firm. The building erupted, but Chuck turned and walked away, ducking under the ropes without ceremony. At the tunnel he paused, glanced back once, checking the room, not soaking it in. Then he disappeared into the concrete shadows. On the canvas, the champion remained, head bowed, ribs aching, but eyes sharper than before. The towel hung in the corner, untouched. The lesson had already been taken. The commentators finally found words. "That wasn't about power," one said. "That was about choices." And when the crowd filed out under softer lights, they carried that same feeling home. That sometimes the loudest victory comes in silence.